All right, Pail of Air by Fritz Lieber. Illustrated by Ed Alexander. It's produced by the Galaxy Science Fiction, December 1951. Extensive research did not uncover any evidence that U.S. copyright in this publication was renewed. The dark star passed, burning, bringing with it eternal night, and turning history into incredible myth in a single generation. Pa had sent me out to get an extra pail of air. I had just about scooped it full, and most of the warmth had leaked my fingers when I saw the thing. You know, at first I thought it was a young lady. Yes, a beautiful young lady's face, all glowing in the dark and looking at me from the 5th floor of the opposite apartment. In which abouts the floor just above the white blanket of frozen air, I'd never seen a young lady before, except in old magazines. Sis is just a kid, and Ma's pretty sick and miserable, and it gave me such a start I dropped the pail. Who wouldn't, knowing everyone on Earth was dead except Ma, Pa, Sis, and you? Even that, I don't suppose I should have been surprised. We all see things now and then. Ma and Pa's the pretty bad ones, just the way she bugs her eyes at nothing, and just screams and screams and huddles back against the blankets, hanging around the nest. Pa's is natural, and we should react like that sometimes. When I recovered the pail and could look again at the opposite apartment, I got an idea of what Ma might be feeling at those times. For I saw it wasn't a young lady at all, but simply a light, a tiny light that moved stealthily from window to window, just as if one of the cruel little stars had come down from the airless sky to investigate why Earth had gone away from the sun, maybe to hunt down some to torment or terrify, and now the Earth didn't have the sun's protection. I tell you, though, the thought of it gave me the creeps. I just stood there shaking, almost... Okay, I should probably zoom out of this, shouldn't I? Oh, no. Whatever. It's fine like that. Okay. Where was I? I just realized it was too... Yeah. I stood there shaking. I almost froze my feet to the frost of my helmet, so solid on the inside I couldn't have seen the light, even to come out of the window to get me. Then I had the wit to go back inside. Pretty soon, I was feeling my familiar way through the 30 or so blankets and rugs Pa's got hung around to slow down the escape of air from the nest, and I wasn't quite so scared. I began to hear the ticking of clocks in the nest, and knew I was getting back into air, because there's no sound outside in the vacuum, of course. My mind was still crawly and uneasy. I pushed the last blankets. Pa's got them faced aluminum foil to hold the heat, and came into the nest. Let me tell you about the nest. It's a low, snug room, just for the 4 of us and our things. The floor is covered with thick, woolly rugs. 3 of the sides are blankets, and the blankets are roofing it to touch Pa's head. Tells me it's inside a much bigger room, but I ain't never seen the real walls or ceiling. Against one of the blanket walls, a big set of shelves with tools and books and other stuff. Top of it, a whole row of clocks. Pa's very fussy at keeping them wound. He says we must never forget time. Without a sun or moon, that would be easy to do. The 4th wall is blankets all over except for the fireplace, which there is a fire which must never go out. It keeps us from freezing and does a lot more besides. One of us must always watch it. Some of the clocks are alarm. We can use them to remind us. In the early days, only Ma would take turns with Pa. I think that when she gets difficult, it's now there me to help. Sis too. It's Pa who's chief guardian of the fire, though. I always think of him that way. A tall man sitting cross-legged, frowning anxiously beside the fire. His lined face golden in its light, never so often, carefully placing a piece of coal from the big heap beside it. Pa tells me he used to be guardians of the fire sometimes in the old days. Vestal virgins, he calls them. Though that was when unfrozen air all around, you didn't really need one. He was sitting just that way now. We got up quick to take the pail from me and ball it for loitering. He spotted up my frozen helmet right off. That roused Ma, and she joined him, picking on me. She's always trying to get the load off her feelings, Pa explains. That shut her up pretty fast. Sis let off a couple of silly squeals, too. Pa handed the pail of air a twist of cloth. Now that it was inside the nest, you could really feel its coldness. It just seemed to suck the heat out of everything. Even the flame cringed away from it as Pa put it down close to the fire. Yet, it's that glimmery white stuff in the pail that keeps us alive. It slowly melts and vanishes and refreshes the nest and feeds the fire. The blankets keep from escaping too fast. Pa would like to seal the whole place, but he can't. Building's too earthquake-twisted. Besides, he has to leave the chimney open for smoke. Pa says his tiny molecules will fly away like a flash if there isn't something to stop him. We have to watch sharp not to let the air burn low. Pa always keeps a big reserve of stuff in buckets behind the first blanket, along with extra food and coal and cans of food and other things, such as pails of snow to melt for winter. We have to go way to the bottom floor for that stuff, which is a mean trip. Get it through the door to outside. You see, when the earth got cold, all the water in the air froze first. Made a blanket 10 feet thick or so everywhere. And then, dropped down on top of it, dropped the crystals of frozen air, making other white blankets 6 or 7 feet thick maybe. Of course, all the parts of the air didn't freeze and snow down at the same time. The first to drop out was the carbon dioxide. When you're shoveling from water, you have to make sure you don't get too high and get any of that stuff mixed in, or it'll put you to sleep, maybe for good, make the fire go out. Next, there's the nitrogen, which doesn't count one way or the other, though it's the biggest part of the blanket. Top of that is easy to get at, which is lucky for us. There's the oxygen that keeps us alive. Pa says we live better than kings ever did, breathing pure oxygen, but we're used to it and don't notice. Finally, at the top, there's a slick of liquid helium, which is funny stuff. All these gases in neat separate layers like a pussy caffy. Pa laughingly says whatever that is. I was busting to tell them all about what I'd seen. As soon as I ducked on my helmet and was climbing into a suit, I cut loose. Right away, Ma got nervous and began making eyes as the entry slit in the blankets and wringing her hands together, from where he'd lost 3 fingers from frostbite inside the good one. As usual, I could tell Pa was annoyed at me scaring her, but wanted to explain it all away quickly. Yet, could see I wasn't fooling. You watched this life for some time, son? He asked when I finished. I hadn't said about first what thinking it'd be a young lady's face. Somehow that part embarrassed me. Long enough for it to pass 5 windows and go to the next floor. And it didn't look like static electricity or crawling liquid or starlight focused through glowing crystal or anything like that. He wasn't making up those ideas. Odd things happen in the world about as cold as can be. Just when you think matter could be frozen dead, it takes on a strange new life. Slimy stuff comes crawling toward the nest just like an animal stuffing for heat. That's the liquid helium. And once, when I was little, a bolt of lightning, not even Pa could figure where it came from, hit the steeple and crawled up it for 2 weeks until the glow finally died. Not like anything I ever saw, I told him. He stood for a moment, frowning. Then I'll go out with you, and you shown it to me. Ma raised a howl of the idea of being left alone, and Sis joined in too, but Pa quieted him. We started climbing outside our clothes. Mine had been warming with a fire. Pa made them. They have plastic headpieces that were once double-duty transparent food cans, but they kept the heat and hair in, braced the air for a little while long enough for our trips and water and coal and food and so on. Ma started moaning again. I've always known there's something outside there waiting to get us. I've felt it for years. Something that's part of the cold and hates all warmth and wants us toward the nest. It's been watching us all this time. Now it's coming for us. It'll get you and then come for me. Don't go, Harry. Pa had everything but on the helmet. He knelt by the fireplace and reached in and shook the long metal rod that goes with the chimney and knocks off the ice trying to clog it. Once a week he goes to the roof to check if it's working all right. That's our worst trip. Pa won't let me make it alone. Sis, Pa said quietly, come watch the fire. Keep an eye on the air. If it gets low or doesn't be boiling fast enough, fetch another bucket from behind the blanket. But mind your hands. Use a cloth to pick up the bucket. Sis quit helping Ma be frightened and came over and did as she was told. Ma quieted down pretty suddenly, though her eyes were still kind of wild as she watched Pa fix his helmet tight and pick up a pail, and the 2 of us got out of there. Pa led the way, and I took hold of his belt. It's a funny thing. I'm not afraid to go by myself, but when Pa's along, I always hold on to him. Habit, I guess. And there's no denying this time I was a bit scared. You see, it's this way. We know that everything's dead out here. Pa heard the last radio voices fade away years ago. He's seen some of the last folks die who weren't as lucky or well protected as us. So we knew that there was something groping around out there, but it couldn't be human or friendly. Besides that, there's a feeling that comes with being at night, cold night. Pa said there used to be some of that feeling even in the old days, but every morning sun would come and chase it away. I have to take his word for that. Not remembering the sun as being everything more than a big star. You see, I hadn't been born when the dark star snatched us away from the sun. Now it's dragged us out of orbit for the planet Pluto, Pa says, and taking us farther out all the time. I found myself wondering what might be somewhere in that dark star that wanted us. That's why it had captured Earth. As we came to the end of the corridor, I followed Pa out on the balcony. I don't know what the city looked like in the old days, but now it's beautiful. The starlight lets you see pretty well. Quite a bit of light and those steady points speckling the blackness above. Pa says the stars used to twinkle once, but that was because there was air. We are on a hill, and shimmery plain drops away from us and flattens out, cut up into neat squares by the troughs used to be streets. Sometimes I make my mashed potatoes look like it before I pour on the gravy. Some taller buildings push out of the feathery plain, topped by rounded caps of air crystals like the fur hood Ma wears, only whiter. On those buildings you can see darker squares of windows underlined by white dashes of air crystals. Some of them are on a slant, for many of the buildings are pretty badly twisted by the quakes and all the rest that happened when the Dark Star captured Earth. Here and there, a few icicles hang, water icicles from the first day of the cold. Other icicles of frozen air that melted on the roofs and dripped and froze again. Sometimes one of those icicles will calculate a star, and since he is so brightly, I think the star swooped into the city. That was one of the things Pa had been thinking of when I told him about the light. I had thought about it myself, and first I'd known it wasn't so. He touched his helmet to mine so we could talk easier, and he asked me to point out the windows to him. But there wasn't any light moving around inside the Now or anyone else. To my surprise, Pa didn't bawl me out and tell me he'd been seeing things. He looked around quite a while filling his pail. As we were going inside, he whipped around without warning to take something peeping off the guard. I could feel it too. The old peace was gone. There was something lurking out there, watching, waiting, getting ready. Inside, he said to me, touching helmets, "If you see something like that again, son, don't tell the others. Your ma's sort of nervous these days, and you know the feeling of safety we can give her. Once, it was when your sister was born, ready to give up and die, but your mother kept me trying. Another time, she kept me trying. Fire going a whole week by herself while I was sick. Nursed me and took care of the two of you, too." You know that game we play sometimes sitting in a nest? Tossing a ball around? Courage is like a ball, son. A person can only hold it so long, and then he's got to toss it to someone else. When it's tossed your way, you've got to catch it, and hold it tight, and hope there'll be someone else to toss it to when you get tired of being brave. He's talking me a way that made me feel grown up and good, but it didn't wipe away the thing outside the back of my mind, or the fact that Pa took it seriously. It's hard to hide your feelings about such a thing. When we got back to the nest and took off our outside claws, Pa laughed about it and told him it was nothing and kidded me for having such an imagination. But his words fell flat. He didn't convince Ma and Sis any more than he did me. Looked for a moment we were all fumbling the courage ball. Something had to be done, and before I knew what I was going to say, I heard myself asking Pa to tell us about the old days and how it all happened. He sometimes didn't mind telling that story, and Sis and I should like to listen, and he got my idea. So we settled around the fire a wink, and Ma pushed up some cans of thaw for supper, and Pa began. Before he did, though, I noticed him casually get a hammer from the shelf and lay it down beside him. It was the same old story as always. I think I could recite the main thread of it in my sleep, though Pa would put a new detail or two and keep improving it in spots. He told us how Earth had been swinging around the star ever so steady and warm that people kept fixing to make more money and wars and have a good time and get power and treat each other right or wrong, and then, without warning, there comes charging into space this dead star, this burned-out sun, and upsets everything. You know, I find it hard to believe, in a way those people felt, any more than I can believe about a swarming number of them. Imagine people getting ready for the horrible sort of war they were cooking up, wanting it even, or at least wishing it were over so as to end their nervousness. So if all folks didn't have to hang together and pool every bit of warmth just to survive, how can they have hope to end danger any more than we can hope to end the cold? Sometimes I think Pa exaggerates and makes things out too black. He's crossless once in a while, and probably cross with all these folks. Still, some of the things I read in old magazines sound pretty wild. He may be right. The Dark Star, as Pa went on telling, rushed in pretty fast. Wasn't much time to get ready. From the beginning, they tried to keep it a secret from most people. But then the truth came out, with the earthquakes and floods. And imagine oceans of unfrozen water. People seeing stars blotted out by something on a clear night. First off, they thought it would hit the sun. And they thought it would hit the earth. There was even the start of a rush to get to places called China, because people thought it would start hitting the other side. But then they found out it wasn't going to hit either side, it just came very close to Earth. Most of the planets that were on the other side of the sun didn't get involved. The sun and the newcomer fought over Earth a while, pulling it this way, that, like two dogs growling over a bone. Pa described it this time. When the newcomer won and carried us off, the sun got a consolation prize. The last minute, it managed to hold on to the moon. That was the time of the monster earthquakes and floods, 20 times worse than anything before, and also the time of the big jerk, as Pa calls it, when Earth got yanked away suddenly. Just as Pa has done to me once or twice, grabbing me by the collar to do what I've been sitting too far from the fire. You see, the Dark Star was going through space faster than the sun, in the opposite direction. had to wrench the world considerably in order to take it away. The big jerk didn't last long. It was over as soon as the Earth was settled down in this new orbit around the dark star, but it was pretty terrible while it lasted. Pa said all sorts of cliffs and buildings toppled, oceans slopped over swamps, and sandy desert gave great sliding surges that buried nearby lands. Earth almost jerked with its atmospheric blanket. The air got so thin in spot, people keeled over and fainted. But of course, at the same time, they were getting knocked down by the big jerk, or maybe their bones or skulls crack. We often asked Pa how people acted during that time, whether they were scared, or brave, or crazy, or stunned, or all four. He's sort of leery of the subject, and he was again tonight. He said he was mostly too busy to notice. You see, Pa and some scientist friends of his figured out the part that was going to happen. They'd known we'd all get captured and air would freeze. They'd been working like mad to fix it a place with airtight walls and doors, insulation against the cold, and big supplies of food and water and bottled air. The place got smashed in the last earthquakes, and all of Pa's friends were killed in the big jerk. So he had to start over and throw the nest together quick without any advantages, using stuff he could lay his hands on. I guess he's telling pretty much the truth when he says he doesn't have time to keep an eye on how other folks behaved. Either then or in the big freeze that followed very quick, both because the dark star was pulling us away very fast, and its rotation had slowed in the tug-of-war so that the nights were 10 old nights long. Still, I've got an idea of the things that happened from the frozen folk I've seen, a few of the other rooms in our building, often clustered around the furnace in the basement where we go for coal. One of the rooms is an old man sits stiff in a chair, with an arm and a leg and splints. In another, a man and woman are huddled together in a bed with heaps of covers over them. You can just see their heads peeking out close together. And another, a beautiful young lady sitting in a pile of wraps huddled together, looking hopefully towards the door as if waiting for someone who never came back with warmth and food. They're all stiff and still as statues, of course, but just like life. Pa showed them to me and once in quick winks of his flashlight. He still had a fair supply of batteries and could afford to waste a little light. That scared me pretty bad and made my heart pound, especially the young lady. Now, with Pa telling his story for the umpteenth time to take our minds off another scare, I got thinking the frozen folk again. All of a sudden, I got an idea that scared me worse than anything yet. You see, I just remembered the face I thought I'd seen in the window, forgotten on account of trying to hide it from the others. What if, I asked myself, if the frozen folk were coming to life? What if they were like the liquid helium that got a new lease on life and started crawling toward the heat just when you thought its molecules ought to freeze solid forever? Or like that electricity that moves endlessly when it's just about as cold as that? What if ever-growing cold, with the temperature creeping down to the last few degrees, the last zero, had mysteriously wakened the cold, frozen folk to life? Not warm-blooded life, but something icy and horrible. That was a worse idea than the one about coming down from the dark star to get us. Or maybe, I thought, both ideas might be true. Something coming down from the dark star and making the frozen folk move, using them to do its work. That would fit with both things I'd seen, the beautiful young lady and the moving, star-like light. The frozen folk with minds from the dark star behind their unwinking eyes, creeping, crawling, snuffing their way up, following the heat to the nest. I tell you, I thought it gave me a very bad turn, and I wanted very badly to tell the others my fears. But I remember what Pa said and clenched my teeth and didn't speak. We were all sitting very still. Even the fire was burning silently. It was just the sound of Pa's voice and the clocks. And then, from the blankets, I thought I heard a tiny noise. My skin tightened all over. Pa was telling about the early years in the nest and come to a place where he philosophizes. So I asked myself then, he said, what's the use of going on? What's the use of dragging out a few years? What's a prolonged doom to losing to hard work and cold loneliness? Human race is done. Earth is done. Why not give up? I asked myself, and all of a sudden, I got the answer. Again, I heard the noise, louder this time, a kind of uncertain, shuffling tread, coming closer. I couldn't breathe. Life's always been a business of working hard and fighting the cold, Pa was saying. Earth's always been a lonely place, millions of miles from the next planet. No matter how long human race might have lived, in the end, luck would have come up some night. Those things don't matter. What matters is that life is good. It has a lovely texture, like some rich cloth or fur. The petals of flowers, you've seen pictures of those, but I can't describe how they feel, or the fires glow. It makes everything worthwhile. That's true for the last man as the first. And still the steps kept shuffling closer. It seemed to me the innermost blanket trembled and bulged a little, just as if they were burned into my imagination. I kept seeing their peering, frozen eyes. So right then and there, Pa went on, and I could tell that he heard the steps too. He was talking loud, so maybe we wouldn't hear him. Right then, I told myself I was going as if we'd have eternity ahead of us. I have children, teach them all I could, get them to read books. I planned for the future, try to enlarge and seal the nest. I do what I could to keep everything beautiful and growing. Keep alive my feeling of wonder, even at the cold and dark and distant stars. But then, the blanket actually did move and lift. There was a bright light somewhere behind it. Pa's voice stopped. Eyes turned to the widening slit, and his hand went out and took to grip the handle of his hammer. In, through the blanket, stepped the beautiful young lady. She looked there, the strangest way. She carried something bright and unwinking in her hand. Two other faces peered over her soldiers, men's faces, white and staring. Well, my heart couldn't have stopped for more than 4 or 5 beats before I realized she was wearing a suit and helmet, like Pa's homemade ones, only fancier. And the men were too, and the frozen folk certainly wouldn't be wearing those. Also, I noticed the bright thing in her hand was just a kind of flashlight. The silence kept on a while. Well, I swallowed hard a couple times, and that was sort of jabbering commotion. They were simply people, you see. We hadn't been the only ones to survive. We just thought so, for natural enough reasons. These people had survived, and quite a few others with them. And when we found out how they survived, Paul let out the biggest whoop of joy. They were for Los Alamos, and were getting their heat and power from atomic energy. Just using the uranium and plutonium intended for bombs, they had it to go on for thousands of years. They had a regular little airtight city with airlocks and all, and they even generated electric light and grew plants and animals by it. At this, Paul had a second whoop, making Mom from her faint. We were flabbergasted at them, and they were double flabbergasted at us. One of the men kept saying, "But it's impossible, I tell you. You can't maintain an air supply without a hermetic ceiling. It's simply impossible." And that was after he got his helmet off and using our air. Meanwhile, the young lady looking at us as if we were saints, telling us we'd done something amazing. She suddenly broke down and cried. They'd been scouting around for survivors. They never expected to find any in a place like this. They had rocket ships in Los Alamos and plenty of chemical fuel. As for liquid oxygen, all you do is go shovel air blanket at the top level. So after they got things going smooth in Los Alamos, which had taken years, they decided to make some trips to likely places where might be survivors. No good trying long-distance regular signals, of course, since there was no atmosphere to carry around the curve of the Earth. Well, they found other colonies at Argonne and Brookhaven, and all the way around at Tarwal and Tanatuva. Now they've been giving our city a look, not really expecting to find anything. But they had an instrument that noticed the faintest heat waves and told them there was something warm down here. So they landed to investigate. Of course, we hadn't heard them land, since there was no air to carry the sound. They had to investigate around quite a while before finding us. Those instruments had given us the wrong steer and then wasted time in the building across the street. By now, 5 adults were all talking like 60. Paul was demonstrating to the men who we worked the fire and got rid of the ice in the chimney and all that. Maud perked up wonderfully and was showing the young lady her cooking and sewing stuff, even asking how the woman dressed in Los Alamos. The strangers marveled at everything and praised the skies. I could tell from the way they wrinkled their nose they found the nest a bit smelly, but never mentioned that, just asked bushels of questions. In fact, there was so much talking that Pa forgot about things. It wasn't until they were all getting groggy, looked in the air and boiled with a pail. He got into a bucket quick from inside the blankets. Of course, they started them all laughing and jabbering again. The newcomers even got a little drunk. They weren't used to so much oxygen. Funny thing, though, I didn't do much talking at all, and Sis hung on to Ma the whole time and hid her face and looked at her. I felt pretty uncomfortable and disturbed myself, even about the young lady. Glimpsing her outside there, I had all sorts of mushy thoughts, but now I was embarrassed and scared of her, even though he tried to be nice as anything to me. Sort of wish they'd quit crowding around the nest and let us be alone and get our feelings straightened up. When the newcomers didn't talk about all going to Los Alamos, as I'd taken for granted, here the same feeling struck Ma and Pa too. Pa got a very silent, so Ma was telling me, wouldn't know how to act there, and I haven't any clothes. Strangers were puzzled like anything at first, and they got the idea, as Pa kept saying, doesn't seem right to let this fire go out. Well, the strangers are gone, but they're coming back. Hasn't been decided just what'll happen. Maybe the nest will be kept at one of the survivors call a survival school. Maybe we'll join the pioneers who are trying to reestablish a new colony at the uranium mines, the Grave Slave Lake, or the Congo. Of course, now the strangers are gone, I've been thinking a lot about Los Alamos and the other tremendous colonies. Been hankering to see him for myself. You ask me, Pa wants to see him too. He's getting pretty thoughtful, watching Ma and Sis perk up. It's different now that we know those are alive. Your Ma doesn't feel so hopeless anymore. Nor do I. For the matter of not having to carry the whole responsibility of keeping the human race going, so to speak. Scares a person. I looked around the blanket walls and the fire and pails of air boiling away and Ma and Sis sleeping in the warmth and flickering night. It's not going to be easy to leave the nest, I said, wanting to cry, kind of. It's so small and there's just for the four of us. I get scared of the idea of big places and lots of strangers. He nodded and put another piece of coal in the fire. Then he took a little pile and grinned suddenly and put a couple of handfuls on, just as it was one of our birthdays or Christmas. You'll quickly get over that feeling, son. The trouble with the world is that it kept getting smaller and smaller until it ended with a nest. Now it'll be good to have a huge world again, the way it was in the beginning. I guess he's right. You think the beautiful young lady will wait for me till I grow up? I'll be 20 in only 10 years. And there we are. A Pail of Air. Thank you, Blade, for recommending that one. And as well, thanks again for the emotes. Or for the subs. That's the word. Twitch is still new to me. I've been a affiliate long. But yeah, no, the Pail of Air is a really good one. I'm pretty glad he had me read it. Because, yeah. It's pretty good, and like, you know, the metaphor's there. Like, you could take this to an English class and be like, okay, this is what it's about. But honestly, it's just a good story. The themes are there and they're fun, but